The chisel mark stopped me cold. Not the pillar. Not the geometry. Not even the age. A single chisel mark, preserved in limestone for 12,000 years, on a surface that was never supposed to exist. Göbekli Tepe, southeastern Turkey. A site that broke the first rule of human history before the second layer of soil was even cleared. We were not supposed to be here yet. That is the sentence no textbook will print cleanly. That is the sentence that sits at the center of 10 structures scattered across 6 continents. Each one an argument carved in stone against the timeline we were given. I want you to stay with me for the next 16 minutes because by the end of this, you will not look at a history textbook the same way again. Not because I'm going to tell you what to think, but because the numbers, and I mean specific, verifiable, peer-reviewed numbers, do not add up. And they haven't added up for a long time. Taken alone, any one of these structures can be explained away. A lucky coincidence, a misread date, an over-enthusiastic amateur. But together, aligned, weighted, cross-referenced across cultures that were never supposed to have spoken to each other, they stop looking like anomalies. They start looking like a record of something that came before. And the fact that you've never heard most of this in a classroom is, I would argue, the most interesting part of all. This is the story of 10 structures that don't fit, and the story of what it means that they don't. The official story goes like this. Humans hunted and gathered for tens of thousands of years. Around 10,000 BCE, the climate stabilized after the last ice age, and slowly, tentatively, we began to settle. Agriculture emerged in the Fertile Crescent. Villages formed, then towns, then cities. The first true civilizations appeared in Mesopotamia around 3,500 BCE. Writing, governance, architecture, organized religion. Civilization is a ladder, rung by rung. Stone Age, then Bronze Age, then Iron Age, then us. Let me be fair to the official narrative right now before we go any further. The archaeologists who built this timeline are not idiots. They are not corrupt. They spent careers in brutal fieldwork, cataloged thousands of sites, and cross-referenced their findings through a century of peer review. The evidence for the standard timeline is real. The problem is not that it was invented. The problem is what the timeline does with the evidence that doesn't fit inside it. What gets quietly labeled anomalous? What gets published in footnotes? What gets excavated, documented, and then allowed to fade from public conversation as if by institutional agreement? What doesn't fit keeps accumulating. And it starts here. Structure 1, Göbekli Tepe, the monument that should not exist. The site was excavated beginning in 1994 by German archaeologist Klaus Schmidt, working a hillside that an American survey team had dismissed in the 1960s as a medieval cemetery. Schmidt started digging. What came out of the ground changed everything, or should have. T-shaped limestone pillars, standing up to 6 meters tall, weighing up to 15 tons each, arranged in precise circular enclosures, carved with foxes, vultures, scorpions, and aurochs. Not scratched, not scrawled, but rendered in a representational style indicating deliberate artistic intention. The site dates to at least 9,600 BCE, possibly older. We don't know yet because here is the detail that should be making headlines. Less than 5% of Göbekli Tepe has been excavated. Less than 5%. Now here is the problem. The people who built this had no metal tools, no wheels, no domesticated animals. Agriculture had not yet developed in this region. By the official timeline's own classification, these were pre-agricultural hunter-gatherers. And they built a coordinated, multi-generational stone complex requiring the organizational capacity we associate with early statehood. That's not a campsite. That's a civilization without a civilization's prerequisites. And then they buried it. Not erosion. Not neglect. Deliberate, systematic backfilling. The entire site was covered in rubble and soil around 8,000 BCE. Someone wanted it not found. The question archaeology cannot answer comfortably is simple. Why would you bury a monument you spent generations building? I have a theory. but it requires showing you what else is out there first. Because Göbekli Tepe is not the only thing that was hidden. And the next one isn't buried underground. It's underwater. And the Japanese government has been arguing about it since 1986. Structure 2. The Yonaguni Monument. The government doesn't want to classify it. A diving instructor named Kahachiro Aratake was exploring the waters off Yonaguni Island, Japan, in 1986 when he found something that had no business being there. Flat-cut surfaces, right-angle corners, tiered platforms descending into the ocean floor like a submerged staircase built by someone who understood architecture. Japanese geologist Masaaki Kimura of the University of the Ryukyu spent years diving the site. He documented carved channels, tool marks, and a stone column that he described as deliberately shaped. The Japanese Agency for Cultural Affairs declined to classify it as man-made. Not because the evidence was absent, because the implications were geological. If human hands built this, then human hands built it above water, because the last time this section of ocean floor was above sea level was approximately 10,000 to 12,000 years ago. During the last ice age. During the exact period the official timeline says people in this region were gathering shellfish on beaches. Not building architecture. The finding doesn't need to be wrong to be inconvenient. And inconvenient findings, I have learned, tend to stay in specialist journals. The monument is still there. The classification is still disputed. The debate is still not happening in any room most people have access to. Which brings me to something buried not in the ocean, but in a UNESCO footnote I almost missed entirely. Structure 3. Tiwanaku, the dating that was buried alive. Tiwanaku sits at nearly 13,000 feet above sea level on the Bolivian Altiplano, the high plains near Lake Titicaca. What remains of this site includes stone blocks weighing up to 130 tons, quarried from locations dozens of kilometers away, fitted together with sub-centimeter precision and no mortar. The Puma Punku complex within Tiwanaku contains H-shaped interlocking blocks that appear mass-produced to identical tolerances. Not similar, identical, as if cut by a template or by something that behaved like one. The mainstream dating places Tiwanaku's peak between 500 and 1000 CE. Skilled craftsmen, advanced social organization. That explanation is fair. But here is what I found buried in a 1964 UNESCO report I was reading for an entirely different reason. A footnote, the practiced language of institutional caution, acknowledging the work of Bolivian archaeologist Arthur Poznansky. He spent decades conducting astronomical analysis of the Kalasasaya temple's solar alignments. His calculation placed the structure's orientation at positions matching solar angles from approximately 15,000 BCE. 15,000 years before the Common Era. Poznansky's dating was rejected. His methodology was criticized. His measurements were never fully disproved. The Kalasasaya still stands. The sun still rises exactly where he said it did. The footnote goes nowhere. Now, I want you to hold that date, 15,000 BCE, in your mind, because the next structure was described in ancient texts for centuries before anyone believed it was real. And when they finally found it, the finding lasted about 2 weeks in the news cycle before disappearing completely. Structure 4. Dvarka, the city that mythology described first. The Mahabharata describes it. So does the Harivamsha. A great city called Dvarka, swallowed by the sea after the death of Krishna. For centuries, scholars filed this under mythology, sacred stories, poetic literature. Then, in 2001, the National Institute of Ocean Technology was conducting a routine pollution survey in the Gulf of Khambhat off the coast of Gujarat, India, when their sonar equipment detected something on the ocean floor that did not belong there. Geometric grids, right angles, structures extending across a 9-kilometer stretch of seabed. Divers were sent down. Artifacts retrieved. Carbon dating placed human organic material at the site to approximately 9,500 BCE, 9,500 years before the Common Era. more than 5,000 years before the Indus Valley civilization that every textbook marks as India's oldest. The discovery made international headlines for approximately 2 weeks. Then it didn't disappear. It simply ceased to be discussed in any room where the standard timeline was also in the room. Here is what I keep returning to. Biological material does not organize itself into 90-degree angles on an ocean floor. Wood and bone do not spontaneously form grids. The artifacts are biological, organic, carbon-datable, real. The geometry is there. The question of what it means remains, officially, unanswered. Maybe the dating is wrong. Maybe. But I need you to notice something before we move on. Göbekli Tepe, deliberately buried. Yonaguni, classification withheld. Tiwanaku, inconvenient dating footnoted and forgotten. Dvarka, 2 weeks of headlines, then silence. Do you see the shape of what's happening? Because we haven't even arrived at Egypt yet. And Egypt is where the numbers stop being deniable. Structure 5. The Great Pyramid, the precision that breaks the explanation. Before I say anything that pushes against the mainstream here, let me be completely clear about one thing. Egyptologist Mark Lehner's excavations at Giza uncovered a sophisticated workers' village. Bakeries, medical facilities, administrative records, organized labor systems. The people who built the Great Pyramid were not enslaved ghosts. They were fed, housed, paid, and documented. That part one accept entirely. What I cannot explain with that workforce, no matter how skilled, no matter how organized, is this. The base of the Great Pyramid is level to within 2.1 centimeters across its entire 230-meter perimeter. In modern construction, achieving that would require laser surveying equipment. The 4 cardinal alignments deviate by a fraction of a degree. More precisely than most buildings constructed in the last 50 years with all our technology. The relationship between the pyramid's dimensions and mathematical constants, pi, the golden ratio, has been measured and confirmed repeatedly by engineers who went in specifically to debunk it. And then there is the red granite coffer inside the king's chamber, cut from a single block of Aswan granite. Engineer Christopher Dunn, in a 1999 analysis that sits in the engineering literature unreplicated and unrefuted, found it machined to tolerances of 0.005 inches. Its volume matches, almost exactly, the dimensions of the Ark of the Covenant as specified in Exodus. That is either the most extraordinary coincidence in architectural history, or it is information, deliberately encoded, by someone who knew exactly what they were doing, and what would come after. But the pyramid is only half the Egypt story, because a few hundred kilometers south, in a quarry at Aswan, there is something that gets almost no attention. And what it implies about the tools that built Egypt is something the official account still cannot answer. Structure 6. The unfinished obelisk, the tool marks that don't add up. Inside the ancient granite quarries at Aswan lies an obelisk, half-carved, still embedded in bedrock. Abandoned when a crack appeared mid-cut. Had it been completed, it would have stood over 40 meters tall and weighed approximately 1,200 tons. No crane in the ancient world could have lifted it. Not even close. But that's not what stopped me. It was the tool marks. Christopher Dunn analyzed drill cores removed from Egyptian granite sites in the 19th century. The spiral marks left in the cores, the cutting signature, implied a drilling speed 500 times faster than modern diamond-tipped rotary equipment operating at comparable pressure. 500 times faster, with tools that, by the official account, were copper chisels and dolerite balls. The analysis was published. It has not been refuted. It has been ignored. And there is a difference, a significant one, between a finding that is wrong and a finding that is inconvenient. Let me be fair one more time before I continue. There is a legitimate argument that ancient precision is simply the product of time. Given enough workers, enough generations, enough institutional memory, extraordinary accuracy becomes possible. Chartres Cathedral took a century. The Hagia Sophia was built and rebuilt across empires. Long projects with long memories produce outcomes that look like miracles to people who live in a world of quarterly deadlines. That argument is real. Probably explains more than I'm giving it credit for. But here is what it cannot do. It cannot explain all 10 structures simultaneously. Because these sites don't share a culture, an era, or a continent. They share something else, something more specific. And the next structure makes that something impossible to ignore. Structure 7. The Nazca Lines, we misread them for decades. On the desert plateau between the Nazca and Ica valleys in Peru, enormous geoglyphs are etched into the earth. Spiders, hummingbirds, monkeys, geometric grids, straight lines extending for kilometers without a single degree of deviation. Best visible from significant altitude. The accepted purpose for most of the 20th century. Ritual. Sacred art. Offerings drawn large enough for the sky gods to see. Then geologist David Johnson asked a different question. He wasn't looking for meaning. He was looking at water. Johnson spent years mapping the Nazca Lines against underground hydrology, the hidden water table beneath the desert. What he found, published in academic papers beginning in 1999, was not loose correlation. The lines precisely follow underground water sources, with the accuracy that, today, requires ground-penetrating radar to achieve. His proposal, the Nazca Lines are a hydraulic map, engineering documentation, a record of subterranean water resources etched large enough to be read from significant elevation, perhaps by someone who had access to that elevation. We called them sacred art for 60 years. A geologist walked in from a different direction and found infrastructure planning. The timing of that realization, as I keep saying, is almost theatrical. But here is the question that nobody in the mainstream wants to ask out loud. Infrastructure planning for whom? Who was meant to read a map you can only see from the air? Hold that question. Because the next structure doesn't just share the astronomical obsession of the others. It vanished, completely without explanation, taking its builders with it. Structure 8. The Maltese temples, the civilization that simply ceased. The megalithic temples of Malta are older than Stonehenge, older than the Great Pyramid. Gantija, on the island of Gozo, was built around 3600 BCE. The builders used limestone blocks weighing up to 50 tons, enormous by any standard, and inside those blocks, they carved something remarkable. Acoustic apertures, auricle holes, small openings through which sound moves with an engineered precision that modern acoustic researchers have measured and confirmed was deliberate, not accidental, designed. The structures are also oriented toward specific solar and lunar positions, encoding a calendrical knowledge that required sustained astronomical observation across generations. This was not a primitive people. This was a civilization with architectural knowledge, acoustic engineering, and astronomical sophistication, expressing all three in the same building. And then, around 2500 BCE, they were gone. No recorded invasion. No climate catastrophe that matches the timeline. No descendants who carried the tradition forward. No explanation in any archive, sealed or otherwise. The Maltese temple culture, the people who built the most sophisticated megalithic structures in the Mediterranean world, simply ceased. Completely, abruptly, as if a door closed. The stone remembers them. The history does not. And that silence, that sudden, total, unexplained cultural erasure, is itself a kind of evidence. Something happened that we have not found words for yet. Which brings me to an island in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, 10,000 kilometers from everywhere, where the same architectural fingerprint appears on a platform that nobody ever talks about. Structure 9, Easter Island. It's not about the statues. Everyone knows the moai. Nearly 1,000 of them, carved from volcanic tuff, transported across an isolated Pacific island to coastal platforms called ahu. The accepted mechanism, rocking the statues upright and walking them forward, may well be correct. I'm not here to argue the Moai. I'm here to talk about what they're standing on. At Ahu Vanapu, the retaining wall beneath the statues is built in an interlocking polygonal style. Irregular stones fitted together with a precision that leaves no visible gaps. American archaeologist William Malloy, excavating the site in 1961, described the masonry as, in his exact words, Inca-like. The same interlocking polygonal style appears at Sacsayhuaman in Peru, where individual stones fit so precisely that a piece of paper cannot be passed between them. The same style appears at megalithic sites in the ancient Near East. Easter Island and the Peruvian coast had, by every established account, no contact with each other. Maybe independent cultures arrived at the same solution by chance. Maybe the style is generic enough to appear anywhere stone is worked with care. Maybe, but the signature repeats: the interlocking polygon, the astronomical alignment, the massive unmoved stone. Across cultures that the official timeline says never spoke to each other. Across 12,000 years. Across 6 continents. The same fingerprint, left by hands that were never supposed to have met. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Structure 10. Sacsayhuaman. The stones that cannot be explained by any timeline. I have saved this one for last because it is, in my judgment, the hardest to dismiss. The 10 structures in this story are not the whole picture. They are the ones whose stone was too heavy to move, whose ocean floor was too deep to pave, whose numbers were too precise to bury entirely. They survived because they were built to outlast the silence surrounding them. And the silence is starting to crack. Because once you see the pattern, once you see the same geometry, the same astronomical obsession, the same engineering signature appearing across 12,000 years of human record in places that were never supposed to have spoken to each other, you stop asking how they built it. You start asking who taught them. And I don't have that answer. Not yet. But I know one thing. Every time that question gets close to a real answer, something gets buried. A site, a finding, a footnote, a drawer that doesn't open until someone decides the world is ready. I'm starting to think the world has been ready for a very long time.